right. There we go. All right, good morning, everybody. I ask your patience as you bear with me, and I make my way through kind of a Dayquil haze. Did everybody get the announcement on Monday through BSpace? You guys were able to find that class was canceled on Monday, or did you have to come and find out? Most of you got it by email? Okay, great. So yeah, I'm not at 100% right now, but I'm still operational. So again, bear with me as we kind of get together. A few announcements before we get started. April 29th, which is next Monday, right? The final project is going to be due. So that's the museum project. You guys have already been up to the Bade and section, so you know where it is. Do make sure that you get a chance to get up there if you haven't already. And that'll be due in class Monday the 29th. Of course, ask Tony or myself any questions about that assignment. It's on BSpace too, so take a look and you can check it out. Yeah, Liam. Yeah, it should be open. Do we know the opening hours? I had it on the main link. Yeah, sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head. That's true. You know what we'll do is, it's on the link, but we'll find out and then I'll announce it in class on Friday too. Make sure that you guys have the opportunity to get up there. All right, so on Friday, we were talking about Nineveh, and we were talking about the reign of Sennacherib. And we were looking at some of the reliefs from Nineveh, and I wanted to kind of take a look at some of these other ones as well. Last year, I had the chance to get up to the British Museum, where a number of these reliefs actually are. And my slides tend to be kind of broad, but I've got some close-up images which are really quite interesting. We were looking at the Lachish reliefs, and we looked at how Sennacherib went on campaign, but unlike Sargon II, who dies in battle, unlike these previous Assyrian kings, the only depiction of him at Lachish is actually receiving tribute, receiving booty from the sacked city. And we can see here again, here he is sitting in this high-backed throne, this wonderfully carved, ornate throne. Behind him, you can see this sort of temporary structure, right, with two roofs, beams, and then cross braces. This is a part of the royal encampment. And behind this tent, we see actually the Assyrian encampment, the encampment that was built outside of Lachish to lay siege to it. And you can see there's a temporary wall with small towers surrounding it, a central road. And again, these temporary structures, small houses with Assyrian soldiers resting, more of those temporary tents. So again, a lot of detail going into showing the operation of this military campaign that Sennacherib engaged in. Again, trying to take Jerusalem, but failing to do that, and instead taking Lachish and making that the centerpiece of those reliefs at Nineveh. We talked about Sennacherib being an unpopular king for a number of reasons, not just for sacking cities like Lachish, but also sacking Babylon in 689. Sennacherib's solution to dealing with Babylonian uprisings is to sack the entire city, which doesn't go down well at all. We know in 680, perhaps linked, perhaps not, he's murdered actually by his own sons in an uprising in his own palace, and this sets off a bit of a war of succession. We see the emergence of two sons of Sennacherib. One named Arda Musili, who's right here at the bottom, and the other son is named Esarhaddon. Now, Esarhaddon was not the next in line. He was actually a few sons down, but the way that the Assyrian system is set up is that the king can choose his successor. However, while Esarhaddon had been tapped to be crown prince, his brothers had edged him out of town prior to the death of Sennacherib. And he actually only returns after Sennacherib dies to duke it out with his brother Arda Musili, who tries to take power. Esarhaddon is successful in that In 681, he returns from exile and takes power. And what we know of Sennacherib is quite sparse in terms of his inscriptions and in terms of his artistic depictions. But what we do know is that he seems to have been a rather superstitious or religious man. He puts a tremendous amount of faith in omens and astrological predictions. And perhaps we can't really blame him for that, considering what happened to his father and considering what happened to his grandfather. The text we do have talk quite a bit about the illnesses that he suffered from. He appears to have had everything ranging from fevers to ear infections, eye infections, weakness and stiffness in the joints, and complains about these bitterly. We should mention, too, that in addition to bad events happening, like Sargon II dying on campaign and his body not being returned to the Assyrians, sickness and illness is also something that was seen as linked to the gods and linked to divine favor. So in Mesopotamian medicine, we see two kinds of doctors. We see a doctor known as the Asu. And the Asu is a doctor who deals with the body, right? So an Asu will prescribe actual medicine, will mend your breaks in your bones, will deal with some of the traditional medicine that we've come to expect. We talked about medicine and beer, for example, being prescribed for certain remedies because of its antibiotic properties. So an Asu would do that. We also see another figure known as an Asipu. Asipus also are doctors, but instead of dealing with the body, they deal more with the metaphysical realm. Again, illness and sickness can be caused not just from a disease or an infection, but it could also be a demon inhabiting your body. It could be your ancestors are unhappy with you. Something that you've done that's caused ritual pollution, something that your ancestors did that needs to be forgiven. Even curses, right, that were levied against you. So an Asipu is a diviner whose job it is to actually find out what it is that was done to you and why the gods are angry, and then to give you a cure, to say, oh, well, you've actually ended up offending Shamash, and what you need to do is go to the temple of Shamash and sacrifice 5 goats there, and that will cure your illness. So we see that duality in Mesopotamian medicine, physical healers and mystical healers at the same time. We've also seen the importance of omens and omen texts, and certainly this continues in the Assyrian period. Right, we saw during the Kassite period, Kassite Babylon, how these omen texts become standardized and they record solar and lunar and planetary information, all written in sort of a conditional form, right? If X, then Y. So if a red cloud appears on the eastern horizon, then that means that Elam will attack, and so on. Calculations for the waxing and the waning of the moon all allow for predictions to be made in advance. Really what we're seeing is astrology, right? Astrology that's able to calculate the paths of stars, planets, the appearances and disappearances of eclipses, a way of the Assyrian administration and, well, Mesopotamians to actually kind of control the chaos of life, through these set predictions in the sky. And this is actually a great example. This is known as the Plough Star tablet from the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. And this actually records quite a bit of astronomical information. Actually, we have a scholar in the NES department, Laurie Wilkie, who works specifically on Mesopotamian astronomy. So very detailed, interesting material. And these omens, of course, play a major part in planning campaigns. Sargon, Esarhaddon, all of these kings are going to consult oracles in the sky. They're going to consult, they'll consult omens in the sky and then oracles on the ground, using, for example, extispicy, which we talked about before, as a way of getting at this hidden information. And we've seen some of the effects of this. For example, if you encounter an eclipse that predicts the death of the king, well, what do you do about that? right? How do you get around that? We saw one strategy a bit earlier on. If you're a Mesopotamian king and you encounter an omen that the king is going to die, we talked about this a couple classes ago. You guys remember? Sorry? Exactly, yeah. The temporary king or the substitute king ritual, right? So you say, well, okay, if the king's going to die, then I just won't be the king when this happens. And so they put another king on the throne. And this was kind of formalized. You'd actually have the king on the throne for 100 days. If nothing happened, then you'd kill him, right? Because you don't want him to remain the king, obviously. This is very rare. It doesn't happen often. The king is then buried, actually, with full royal honors. We have a few instances prior to the Neo-Assyrian period of this taking place, but just to give you a sense of how superstitious Esarhaddon is, he actually performs this ritual 6 times during his reign. So quite superstitious, if you will. And part of this also has to do with the fact that in 681, at the date of the death of Sennacherib, there was an astronomical event in which Mercury and Saturn were conjoined. And it's a very rare event. And at the time, it was interpreted that Mercury, which is symbolic of the prince, and Saturn, which is symbolic of the king, the two coming together, an omen was put out that the king would die and that his successor would restore all the temples of Babylon. Because remember, Sennacherib destroyed all of these temples in Babylon and carted off the gods. So this omen is thrown out there, and then it apparently comes to pass, right? In 681, we have the death of Sennacherib and the rise of Esarhaddon. So Esarhaddon goes about trying to repair the damage, if you were, from the previous king's reign, from his father's reign. And he actually goes to Babylon and restores the temples there. He spends a lot of time trying to make good with the gods. While perhaps sickly, we do know that Esarhaddon was an Assyrian king, after all. He's an Assyrian king in the truest sense and had a long lineage of conquest to live up to. Some of his military accomplishments include actually getting all the way to Egypt. Remember, Sargon II was able to campaign to the borders of Egypt. Under the reign of Esarhaddon, he's actually able to take Egypt temporarily in 672. He leads an army to Memphis and deposes the Egyptian king there, a king named Taharka, who's actually Nubian in the 25th dynasty. He actually loots Egypt and uses the proceeds from those campaigns, all the booty, to restore Babylon. So he sort of is robbing Peter to pay Paul, in a sense. He's able to rebuild Babylon using the spoils of war from Egypt. And we see some, the depictions we have of him mostly come from these stelae. Here's the stele of Esarhaddon here. Again, sort of depicted in a pose of religious worship, raising a libation here to the gods. You can see here the gods in their symbolic form. Same Assyrian-style beard and hat. He's an Assyrian king in the truest form. And I threw these up here too, so we can see again depictions of these stelae in various locations. Right here at the source of the Tigris, from the Balawat gates, and another stele set up in the garden here at Nineveh. Actually, and this stele is interesting too, because in addition to this religious pose, of course, right, he has control of the periphery. These are actually the king I just mentioned, King Taharka, the Egyptian Nubian king, is here, and he's depicted as a Nubian with this sort of Nubian stylized Nubian hairstyle, and also the king of Tyre, so Phoenician king here. And both are kept on a leash, literally leashed, with these ropes around their neck. So the